I actually want to go back to an earlier point related to identity and the troubles, the IRA, the complex historical, political issues that Northern Ireland had to face. Why is it important to write about these issues now? Why do you feel that these issues, are being addressed by writers like yourself, for instance? How important are they, and why sort of are writers focusing on such issues?
I think because they're still pertinent. I mean, there's a massive misunderstanding that the Troubles are over, and I've begun at the start of the Fire Starters with a passage that says the Troubles is over, the Troubles isn't over, or aren't over. It's hard to know how to conjugate that. We still have peace walls splitting up a huge part of the communities in West Belfast, and even in the east, where the Protestant Catholic communities are separated. We still have 91% of our schools segregated into Protestant and Catholic education. We still have an enormous problem with splinter groups of paramilitaries recruiting particularly young men in. A colleague of mine, a wonderful writer called Lyra McKee, a journalist, was murdered last Easter, in Derry by paramilitaries. We still have punishment meetings happening on a regular. They don't make the news where you are, but our news still has these small acts of violence and fear and intimidation. If you walk to the end of my street, there's a huge mural of some Protestants and loyalist paramilitary painted on the wall with guns and balaclavas. Now, that to me doesn't say that it's over. It says there's still an awful lot of work to be done here, and to not address it would be to put your head in the sand. Now, if you ask me, is it better than it was when I grew up or when I was younger? Absolutely. We're not being checked when we go into shops by army men. There's not the same constant daily bombs and shootings and murders. It's definitely improved, but there's still a fair way to go yet. So that's why we write about it. And I think we also write because, as I said before, not all the stories have been told. There are angles on what happened during the Troubles in Northern Ireland was most of the art came at it very realistically in a very linear fashion. So you have a lot of novels and poetry even and films that are about the paramilitaries. You don't get this rounded picture of what was it like for women, what was it like for young people. The rise of Derry Girls has been amazing because that's a story that hadn't been told in Northern Ireland. Was it like to be a 14-year-old girl in the middle of a conflict? So all those stories still need to be told.
Actually, what I am interested in is in Malta, in our A level, we have something called an A level, which is
we have one of those too.
And for English, one of the poets is Seamus Heaney.
Here he is behind me.
And teaching Seamus Heaney has been quite an interesting foray into all of these political issues within Northern Ireland, because he wrote about the Troubles as well. How would you say? What would you say with respect to literature and current political issues? Should literature be writing about these issues, or should we sort of build a different picture where everything is nice and sunny and great? How do you feel about this?
Well, first of all, I don't think a writer or an artist has any responsibility to do anything. I think my responsibility is to tell stories, and those stories need to come from the gut, and they need to be told in a beautiful, and I don't mean beautiful as always nice, but a beautiful, engaging way. That's my responsibility. I personally think that you would struggle to be in the world right now with all of these influences and issues going on subliminally and not write about politics, whether that's with a capital P or a small p. I had my parents don't really engage with politics at all, and I was up to visit them at the weekend, and I was telling them about all of the political commentary I'm doing at the minute because of the fire starters, and my mum said, "I didn't know you were political." And I just think it's impossible not to be political at the minute. There are too many important and potentially devastating things happening in the world for us to be quiet. But if someone wants to write a story that is beautiful and removes me from that for a moment, that's a political act too. For us in Northern Ireland, I always say the reading of fiction and the writing of fiction is an incredibly important political act, because one of the things that we have struggled with for a long time is radical empathy. So we have othered people to such an extent and separated ourselves from them that people struggle to imagine what life is like for someone from the other side of the sectarian divide. And to learn that skill of being able to empathise through writing fiction or reading fiction, putting yourself in some character's shoes, that's a political act. And that is reflected then in the peace and reconciliation process. A person who can empathise is much less likely to pick up a gun or hurl an insult or put their neighbour's window in. So that you know, to understand what I mean, I think
definitely. And I think one of the issues that when I teach teenagers, and I try to convince them to read. And one of my selling points is that when you read, you learn how to empathize, because you get to see different perspectives that you might not be able to meet in a daily life, or at school or at ballet, wherever. Yeah. And I feel that empathy is a trait that is being lost with our youngsters. I think people are not as empathic as they were before, at least in our culture. This is just my personal opinion and my little observation from working in a school. And I think what you're saying really, really, hits home, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to imagine now because we have the internet and we've got EasyJet, and it's quite easy to experience other cultures. But the Northern Ireland that I grew up in, and certainly the Northern Ireland that my parents grew up in, had very little outside influence coming in. So there weren't, for the whole period of the Troubles, there were almost no bands who came to play in Northern Ireland. It was too dangerous for them to play there. We have one art house cinema in the entire country. It's wonderful, but there's only one of them. Until very recently, we had one independent bookstore. And so it was hard to find those outside voices coming through. And I honestly think it played some part in continuing this bigotry for so long, because there was nothing but an echo chamber of the same voices going round and round.
Definitely. Okay, I'm going to ask you my last two questions. First, let's talk a little bit about the global pandemic, because I think we cannot not talk about it, right? It's the elephant in the room. Has it affected your work drastically, as in your writing, or has this been a period of, insight and inspiration and writing?
Yes to both.
Okay.
So, I mean, the main thing that has stopped me doing is traveling. So I was a writer who traveled a lot, and I think I've lost about 8 different countries I should have been in since this began, and that's sad to me, because although it's lovely to talk to you like this, I really love to be with other writers in other places, in the pub afterwards, and furiously debating politics and learning about new writers and things. So I'm really missing all of that. That's changed.
You would have had a live audience in front of us today, as in, when this was meant to happen. So the dynamics would have been totally different.
And it's sad because I don't get to be there, but I also feel I get to lose out on meeting all of you guys as well, because that's been one of my favorite things of the last few years of traveling, has been enjoying other people's cultures and learning about what goes on in their. I've never been to Malta. I was really looking forward to coming to Malta. So yes, that has changed. But I've also, to some extent, enjoyed this period because it hasn't been restful for me. I've actually been working longer and harder as everything moves online. But I feel like I've been much more intent and much more writerly. So I've read a lot of books that I had been putting off for ages. I've thought really hard about process and things like that. And I've written a book and a half since lockdown started, and I've begun a new one yesterday. And I've written a lot of essays as well, which has been really interesting. So yeah, it's been
Fruitful
good
time and very productive. I know that the postcard stories, I believe the second postcard stories is coming out, right?
Where is there?
Yes, I love the cover. It's great. And yeah, there's a really nice, really good YouTube video of you explaining sort of what the postcard stories are and how sort of you went about writing them. My question is maybe a little bit more theoretical in the sense, how do you decide that some stories belong in the short story form or in flash fiction, and how do you decide that some stories need to be fleshed out in a full-fledged novel? As in, is it a conscious decision that you make, or is it sort of accidental?
I think more and more, almost everything I write begins as one of these. So if anyone doesn't know what a postcard story are, they're really tiny. They're only about that long there. They fit on the back of a postcard, and I physically write them and post them out to friends. And I have about 1,000 of them. So I've written quite a few over the last 5 years, and they're a kind of depository for ideas. So if something strikes me as there's potential in a story, I craft it really quickly into a little piece of microfiction, and then I actually have an index. So I have them indexed on my computer under different themes like nature and Belfast, and some of them get earmarked. Yeah, there's an idea there. It could develop into something else. Mostly short stories, so mostly they've become longer short stories. One has become a play, one has become a novel. Just from I like that idea of the character. I think there's something there in the character. More frequently, lots of them fuse together, so there's little elements of them come out in different novels. And there's a series of young people in the Firestarters called the Unfortunate Children of East Belfast, who are like really crap X-Men with terrible superpowers you can't use, and a number of them began life as little sketches and postcard stories. So yeah, it's I always say to my students, it's a really great place to park an idea so you don't lose it. Because we always think, that thing you think of when you're just falling asleep, that would be a great story. I'll remember that when I sit down to write next week, and you never do. So I have my index I can go back to, and it's the postcard stories.
That's a really great idea. I think it's a really good advice for those of us who like to write. I think writing it down and keeping a record of it, really and truly, that's what you're doing, and then sort of thinking about which way to take it.
Yeah,
that's great. Okay, my final question is related to your reading. So you said you read a lot of books, and can you mention 3 books which are indispensable to you as a writer?
Just 3, look.
Yes, I just want 3. Well, or maybe 5. We can stretch it to 5 if you wish, but not more than 5.
Okay, I can probably do 5. So non-fiction, Flannery O'Connor's Mystery and Manners, which is her essays and letters on writing and Catholicism, absolutely beautiful, and I come back to them over and over again. My probably most influential book as a young writer was Wuthering Heights. I'd been brought up on a diet of Jane Austen, and then suddenly Heathcliff and Cathy come into your life, and it's oh dear, what's gone wrong? So that's probably where the weirdness started with that. But I also think it's a wonderful, wonderful novel. I'll go sideways at this point and say it's not a book, but the entire everything he's ever written of George Saunders. I don't know if you know the American writer George Saunders.
Yes, I do.
I find him amazing, and I think what comes across in his work is humanity and kindness. There's just a real understanding of what human beings are, and even when he's talking about the awfulness of human beings, it's done with gentleness and dignity and kindness, and I love his work. Lincoln in the Bardo is a good place to start.
Very good. It's a very good read.
That's great, absolutely great. Let me see, where else would I go after that? We should just stop at that with 3.
3, you managed. Well done.
Yeah, well, I was sneaky there because I mean, there's about 8 George Saunders books. So.
Well, that's fine. You know, or an author. I should have
Can
said.
I do one more?
Yes.
More.
Okay,
I think if there's one book that I wish I had written and know I never will get to this point, it would be Midnight's Children. For me, Midnight's Children is it's the Bible for magic realists. It's just
very good choice. It's a very good choice. Good. Thank you very much for your time. It was a pleasure talking to you, and I hope you liked our chat. And hopefully we'll get to see you soon in Malta at some point in the future.
Thank you so much. They were great questions.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you, everyone. And please pick a book and read.